Hi, my name is Malik. The claim I'll be responding to is to Emma's claim that capital punishment is an unnecessary form of punishment and with less expensive alternatives. Her secondary claims are, first, is the death penalty expenses are far too great. Second, executions require copious amounts of prep time and require several people to be on the job. And third, there are other alternatives. My response to her first claim was she made a point that there's millions of dollars poured into the process of the judgment of capital punishment in comparison to how it would be without capital punishment, just going straight to jail. From the California Commission on the Fair Administration of Justice, they estimate the annual cost of the present death penalty systems to be around $137 million. These costs are nominal compared to the expenses. Say I'll use California as an example. How expensive, the expenses are nominal compared to all the other expenses California has. Based off the California website, government website for 2014-2015, K through 16 education costs were over $50 billion. Health and Human Services costs were over $25 billion. Correction and rehabilitation system costs alone were under $10 billion. So this $137 million seems substantial on its own, but compared to all the other expenses California makes, it is nominal and it doesn't prove her point that well. Her second point was that capital executions require copious amounts of prep time and require several people to be on the job. One of the big problems in America today is that unemployment. So her making the point that this requires a lot of people to be doing the job and a lot of hours spent is kind of So her saying that these people, that it takes so many people, it takes away the fact that without capital punishment, there goes that many people to lose their jobs. So either it really doesn't take that many people, and if they do lose their jobs, not that many people are losing their jobs, or it does take that many people to be a substantial amount for the amount of prep time, and then would be damaging those people's jobs and lives for the risk of someone who has been punished. She also claimed that the execution process is emotionally and mentally taxing for the executioners. However, she provided no proof, no source or evidence of this, so we're forced to just trust her word for it. There's assumptions that needed to be cleared, like no evidence of how much contact the executioners have with the inmates, and no background on how capital punishment works. So we don't even know the severity of capital punishment to believe her judgment that it's emotionally and mentally taxing. Her third claim was that there's other alternatives. That point and all her points after that are relevant to her topic, because it's supposed to be a claim of fact speech, and saying that there's other alternatives now switches over to a claim of policy, and thus weakening her argument. Within those points, she says there should be life in prison without parole, which the majority of states have already employed without problems. Saying without problems is a bold statement. The problem lies in prison overcrowding. In an article written by Portland State University, they say that prison overcrowding is a growing concern in the United States. For one, it causes dangerous and unhealthy environments for the inmates. There's but so much space in there, and to have nobody exiting, such as for capital punishment, it just keeps building up. So there are problems. Keeping these people imprisoned will keep our society safe, but endangers the inmates' new and now society. She also claimed that once an inmate is released around 50 or 60, they are statistically far less to engage in a crime. But this still implies that there is still a risk of an inmate committing a crime at such an age. So even though she made the point that they're less likely, with capital punishment, there is no risk value, and that point is irrelevant, or is unsubstantial to her case. To conclude, there's a lack of evidential proof and a lack of strong points to put an argument against capital punishment.
Excuse me. All right, the structural stuff at the beginning is pretty solid. You clearly state what point you're talking about when you get to the first issue. You cite some evidence on what the death penalty costs are. You put it into a context by comparing it to other budget item issues, and clearly you're diminishing the impact of this and suggesting, like you said, it's a nominal cost that we're dealing with. If there was any advantage that you could demonstrate, if there is a degree of safety or security, if there is any deterrence, for instance, that would suggest that there might be a justification for those costs. Also, I think you might want to do a little bit of comparison of the cost of what it would be to house inmates for life as opposed to the death penalty. I don't know that there would be a substantial trade-off, but it might diminish that argument a little bit more. So I think you've got a good argument there. It could be a little bit stronger here and there. On the second point, I thought that was kind of an interesting strategy to take. Hey, well, at least they've got a job. Unemployment is the strategy for executioners. I think that there are probably other arguments to make here. The better argument I think that you present is that there's really no demonstration that there's any harm on this group of people. The cost issue has already been addressed. You've already talked about, look, if what you're worried about is all the people, it's a nominal cost, which is what we talked about on the first point. So you ought to make a reference back to that particular point. So it's a nominal cost. We get some people employed, and there's no demonstration that anybody is really emotionally hurt. That's an assertion on the advocate's part without any evidence on that. It would have been really, your argument would have been stronger if you had something that you could point to, like the testimony of somebody who's been an executioner for 50 years in Arkansas who says, hey, I sleep fine at night, or something like that.
I looked for that. Her statement is true, but because she didn't put evidence or anything, that was just like, we can't really trust it. Because she didn't have like any evidential proof of it, that I was just saying that we can't really trust that, but it's actually true. Like it's hard.
She didn't present the evidence that you found?
Yeah.
That's a little weird.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and then on the third point, you suggest it's a policy claim. It's only a policy claim if she advances the notion that we should substitute one for the other. When she makes the argument that life without parole would be just as effective, that's a claim of fact. There's a difference between saying that it works and saying that we ought to do it. The challenge that you have to wait. Now I got to look at my notes. I can't see. I can't. Oh. The challenge that you make on overcrowding as an issue feels a little bit weak because the number of inmates that are going to be on death row is relatively small. It never gets discussed here. You're making an awfully big claim on this issue, and I think that that's perhaps a weak press at best. Okay.